in my first response to the email dump from the DNC was, well, this is not going to be good for the convention. And then, you know, Debbie Wasserman Schultz resigning, and I thought, okay, you know, we've got a convention in chaos. And then it occurred to me that last week it was all the stumbles and the oh my God, what's going to happens that caused people to watch the Republican convention, and maybe some suspense, some screw ups, some, you know, is Debbie Wasserman Schultz going to get kicked out? Is she going to get booed? Is she going to be indicted for offering, you know, jobs in exchange for political favors? I think Rod Blagojevich is in prison for that right now. I don't know if what she did rises to that level. I'm guessing it probably doesn't. But, you know, throwing those things out as, you know, gee, what's going to happen might actually dramatically increase the number of people watching the Democratic National Convention, which would be a good thing because it would get our message out. I mean, don't forget the CNN. I mean, you know, this whole thing around Trump. CNN after the election, you know, was publishing these surveys, and they were like, you know, something like 75% of Americans, or here it is. They polled their viewers. This is just CNN. I mean, this is an online poll, so it's largely meaningless. But it probably is showing, you know, Trump's online followers. But overall reaction to Trump's speech, very positive, 57%. In what direction will the policies proposed by Trump move the country? Right direction, 73%. Trump's policy. How did Trump's speech affect your vote? More likely, 56%. Like I said, it's very unscientific, but I think that it's interesting that, you know, just general craziness is producing, hey, let's pay some attention to this. Now, that said, a lot has happened since you and I talked on Friday. I mean, the email dump, the Tim Kaine nomination, or whatever the word is, selection, I guess. He has not yet been nominated. I think, though, that one of the, and my take on Tim Kaine, Sean King wrote a great piece for the New York Daily News about Tim Kaine, and pointing out, you know, Tim Kaine is a good and decent man. He's progressive in the vast majority of his positions, and, you know, he's okay. You know, he's not the. It's not like putting Joe Lieberman in there. You know, I mean, Joe Lieberman was actually a toxic conservative Democrat, the biggest mistake that Al Gore made. And Tim Kaine is not that. Tim Kaine is kind of plain vanilla. And Robert Reich, the former Secretary of Labor in the Clinton administration, longtime friend of the Clintons, professor at UC Berkeley right now, and I believe political science. Might be economics, actually. He's an economist. He writes, and this is from his blog, but it's all over the internet. You can find it on Alternate. You can find it on Huffington Post. You can find it everywhere. And it's an argument that I have been making now for almost a year. Basically, you know, ever since Bernie announced and started really picking up traction quickly everywhere except in the mainstream media, is that, well, here's what Robert Reich says. A Democratic operative I've known since the Bill Clinton administration told me, now that she's won the nomination, Hillary is moving to the middle. She's going after moderate swing voters. And he says, presumably that's why she tapped Tim Kaine to be her vice president. Kaine is as vanilla middle as you can get. But then he goes on to point out the most powerful force in American politics today is anti-establishment fury at a system rigged by big corporations, Wall Street, and the super wealthy. And that's why Donald Trump won the Republican nomination. It's why Bernie Sanders won 22 states. It's why Bernie Sanders won the majority of all votes in the Democratic primary of voters under 45 years old. Because, well, Robert Reich, there are no longer moderates. There is no longer a center. There's authoritarian populism, Trump, and democratic populism, Bernie's political revolution, which is now up for grabs. And he says if Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party don't recognize this realignment, they're in for a rude shock, as I'm afraid is the nation, because Donald Trump does recognize it. His authoritarian populism, I am your voice, is premised upon it. And what is the keystone, the touchstone for the anti-establishment anger and upset that's blowing across America right now? It's money in politics. Very simply. Everything else comes out of that. We can't get a jobs program. Why? Because money in politics. We can't get climate change fixed. Why? Because money in politics. We can't do anything about student loans and student debt and reducing the cost of tuition. Why? Money in politics. We can't do anything about shutting down private prisons and the school to prison pipeline, or for that matter, private schools being paid for with taxpayer funds. We can't do anything about that. Why? Money in politics. Because the people who run all these industries are buying politicians. And it used to be called bribery, but the Supreme Court has said, no, it's perfectly legal. That we can't get trade deals that work for the American people. Why? Because of money in politics. These, the big corporations are writing the trade deals while they're shoveling money to the political parties and the candidates. Robert Reich points out, this was a YouGov Economist poll. This is The Economist magazine, the respected British magazine, The Economist, right? And I quote, 80% of Republican primary voters who preferred Donald Trump as the nominee listed money in politics as an important issue. A similar percentage of Republicans opposed the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United decision. 80% of the grassroots of the Republican Party want to get money out of politics. A New York Times CBS News poll found it was 84% of Democrats and 81% of Republicans want to fundamentally change or completely rebuild our campaign finance system. A Des Moines Register poll of likely caucus goers in Iowa, both Democratic and Republican, found 91% of Republicans, 94% of Democrats unsatisfied or mad as hell about money in politics. And so what Robert Reich says, and I completely agree with this, is Hillary Clinton doesn't need to move toward the middle. She needs to move instead toward the anti-establishment, forcefully committing herself to getting big money out of politics and making the system work for the many rather than the privileged few. I want to talk a little bit about, some of the things that Trump, frankly, has said that we need to be paying careful attention to. Because this is, I'm very concerned that if we all don't get this thing together, and it doesn't mean singing Kumbaya at the DNC necessarily, but if we don't get this thing together, if the Democratic Party doesn't figure this thing out, I think we could be looking at 1968 all over again, where Nixon ran as an outsider, the law and order candidate, such an outsider he'd been rejected by his own party 8 years earlier, or 4 years earlier, actually, 8 years earlier, he'd lost to it was his second bite at the apple, but it was like he ran as an outsider, and Hubert Humphrey ran on his resume. And guess who won?
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here, and please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.